Today we're reviewing the 4080 12GB, which actually changed in name. Now it's the 4070 Ti. Problem solved. It's $100 cheaper, so you get to keep an extra one of those, except this is a partner model that's priced at $850, so it's actually $50 more expensive than that, so you split the difference. It's prop money before you leave a very angry comment. So today we're gonna be reviewing the 4070 Ti, and we're doing things a little differently in this review. Let's get started. Before that, this video is brought to you by us and our brand new limited edition Disappointment Build t-shirt on store.gamersnexus.net. This shirt features an unholy amalgamation of all three brands' GPUs, glitching and artifacting on the front as they were intended. It includes accurate depictions of their designs and vibrant colors printed with sustainable water-based inks. On the back, we have the most disappointing dates of 2022 and their launches, which conveniently feature the RTX 4080 12GB that we're reviewing today. Except now it has a new name, so we'll be able to put it on 2 years worth of shirts. We use high quality shirts and long-lasting fabric dyeing techniques to make these, and the best way to support our in-depth testing and independent reviews is to grab one on store.gamersnexus.net. We're only doing 3 rounds of these and they sell fast, so grab one soon. So first of all, as we get into this review, we actually went back and added this small section in because NVIDIA made repeated verbal claims about a 3.0x increase in performance, and it was clearly just in one hand-picked game in their benchmarks they showed at their CES presentation a day before the launch of this review video, and we took issue with it. NVIDIA didn't really tell the truth, at least not the whole truth in that image. They tweaked it, and they didn't even have the usual sort of legal disclaimer. Here's the footnote on their slides. Just, it's 3 times better.
TI.
And yeah, it says RT overdrive. And if you're familiar with the scene, you can deduce that it's an unfair comparison of DLSS 3 versus DLSS 2. It is not a directly linear comparison. They are benchmarking basically DLSS in a flawed way rather than comparing the 3090 Ti to the 4070 Ti. So saying a 3 times performance increase over the 3090 Ti is, as we said in the news video yesterday, completely unachievable. It is a terrible expectation to set with your customers, and it will crush the launch as a result. NVIDIA is making this way worse for themselves by mismarketing this BS in the day before the reviews launch, but fortunately, it's not that hard to insert a section, so here it is. And now let's go back to the normal review. So we're doing things differently in this review. To just get straight into the dumpster fire that is the 4070 Ti, here's a chart. In Total Warhammer 3 at 4K, the RTX 4070 Ti ran at 67 FPS average, placing it just between the 3080 and the 3090. Let's just stop there and emphasize that we have no idea what the hell NVIDIA was thinking when it originally named this thing a 4080. Cutting off 4 gigabytes in the title doesn't really change the name of the product, as we've talked about with the GT 1030 in the past. And this one, it's pretty bad. They are completely, absolutely insane. This is crazy that it was ever going to be even considered to be called a 4080, because this is an $850 RTX 4070 Ti. It's $50 more than MSRP, which, okay, fine, it's whatever, a better cooler. But originally, it was going to be over $900. And Asus then pulled the stickers off, as NVIDIA told them, and replaced them with stickers or paint that said 4070 Ti instead, and NVIDIA dropped the price and probably gave some kind of rebate to the board partners, all at the behest of NVIDIA, which, that's not Asus's fault, but the crazy part is that selling it at $900 originally, when it is already barely equivalent to an RTX 3080 that sold for $700, that's crazy. NVIDIA forced itself into a completely unwinnable position with this. If they went through with this and called it a 4080, that would imply 0 generational uplift between 2 cards with the same generational naming structure, the same class, 80 versus 80, 0 change, for an extra $200 or so MSRP with that original approach. Instead, of course, they dropped it to a 4070 Ti. They dropped the price, as we reported they would do months ago, to $800. So great, only $100 more than a 3080 to get the same performance and call it a 4070 Ti. the names are kind of arbitrary, but as we showed recently in the RTX 4080 problem video, they're not really that arbitrary. So this is why NVIDIA is in an unwinnable position. They've backed themselves into a corner, and the only way this was really avoidable is if they killed this SKU entirely and never talked about it. Or maybe if they killed it after the announcement, but then it was too late. The partners had already made their cards, so they were gonna get screwed. So to not throw away the product, their two options were sell a 4070 Ti that performs the same or within a couple percent depending on the game, and you'll see more later, sometimes more, but it performs the same as a 3080 in this game, simultaneously calling it 70 class silicon and admitting intrinsically that the 70 class silicon has doubled in price over the last 3 generations or has increased charitably about 60% in 1 generation. So that's a bad answer. They are then left with option 2, the only other option here other than killing the product. And option 2 would be to say that it's a 4080 that has 0 improvement versus the last generation 80 card. Both look terrible. So good job, NVIDIA. You chose an option. So the message they're sending then is that at best there's no architectural leap generationally in 2 years, or at worst, fuck you. Oh, that's right. YouTube has new rules now, so I don't know if this is going to be monetized anymore, but please buy one of our shirts if you'd like to support our ability to say things like that on store.gamersnexus.net. At least that's monetized. Anyway, at this point, GPU is like, it's like whose line is it anyway, where the prices are made up and the cards don't matter. Let's move on to the overview. So of course the specs tell us the fuller story. This is not, and it never was, an 80 class piece of silicon. The cut down from the 4080 16GB is huge. It falls from 9728 CUDA cores to 7680. The memory cut down was only part of it, and it's the only part that was reflected in the name. Hence NVIDIA having to change the name if it didn't want to be nailed, really, for lying to consumers. So it loses so much of the core while also losing capacity and memory bandwidth, and that's what really killed this product. And yes, that is the verdict within, I don't know, like 10 minutes of the video or less. It's DOA. NVIDIA is trying to get too much out of the high end, and it's going to pay for its greed this cycle. We've seen it happen before. We saw it happen with the RTX 20 series, and now history is repeating itself. The sad part is, at the launch of the 30 series, someone from NVIDIA told us unofficially that Jensen Huang, the CEO, paid attention to and listened to the price criticism in the 20 series, and that was part of the driver for bringing the price down on the 30 series. I guess he forgot. He's a busy guy. He can't keep track of things for more than a year. Let's get back to testing. In Total Warhammer at 1440p, the RTX 4070 Ti at 137 FPS average is 14% ahead of the RTX 3080. That's at least better than the 4K result in terms of positioning, but it's still not great. The RTX 4080, the actual one, not this one, holds a lead of 28% at a price hike of 50%. And it's a good thing that NVIDIA has invested in AI art, because we can't tell if the corner that it's painting for itself is AI generated or just human stupidity. It's indecipherable, really accurate. This thing, at this point, it's incredible the options they have on the table with just 2 benchmarks into this review, where their own RTX 4080 16GB, which is basically universally snubbed, other than AMD's assist there, it now looks even worse. It's sort of like this is an inverse upsell at this point. Except the thing that they're inverting to is also insultingly positioned, but that's kind of what this is. So it's such a bad launch, we haven't even mentioned AMD's results yet. Maybe that's the strategy. Just be so shockingly, insultingly positioned that people forget about your competitor. Back to the chart, speaking of the competitor, the RX 7900 XTX ran at 180 FPS average, leading the 4070 Ti by 31% for 25% more money. Or, if we compare it to the $850 model we're reviewing today, 18% more money. The 7900 XT didn't have much of a purpose when it launched, but it certainly inherited new life with the 4070 Ti's launch. It actually makes the 4070 Ti look worse, and that's from the position of a card that was not particularly compelling and was itself a greedy upsell. We'll skim through 1080p. The 4070 Ti ran at 209 FPS average, which finally boosts it above the 3080. That's a 20% lead, so it's gaining ground at lower resolutions. Now, unfortunately, NVIDIA has been marketing for years that lower resolutions like 1080p are becoming functionally worthless, so we'll take their word for it and say that that result is pointless. At this point, actually, it's kind of feeling like in Star Wars when they're in the trash compactor thing and all the walls are closing in. It's like that, except I don't know if they're going to be able to escape it. The 7900 XTX in this chart leads the 4070 Ti by 23%. It's about the same as the 4080's lead in that 1080p result. Rainbow Six Siege is up next. In this game, we frequently see FPS higher than 300 for 4K and higher than 600 for 1080p, so sometimes we make fun of how ludicrously high the frame rates are. Now, unfortunately, it's recently come to our attention that one of you in the audience, one of our viewers, has compiled a sequence of all the times I've made fun of Rainbow Six Siege and its frame rates, and it's frankly completely unacceptable, and we won't stand for it. So no more jokes, it will only be serious from here forth. At 4K, the RTX 4070 Ti manages to run at 212 FPS average, which is completely unplayable for even the worst players in Rainbow Six. As we all know, higher frames mean better games, and 212 is below the visible threshold for an adult human. Fortunately, babies can still see below 212 FPS average, so if you're considering a GPU for your infant human, you might want to consider the 4070 Ti. It's perfect for babies. Humans lose the ability to see 212 FPS at different ages, but the median, based on our scientific research, is approximately 16.5 months plus or minus 472 months margin of error. It's sort of similar to NVIDIA's margin of error when it announces the name, specs, and price of a new video card. Back to the chart, the 4070 Ti manages to outdo the 3080 by a massive 10 FPS, or 5%. That's a staggering lead. It's almost even noticeable. Not to mention the better balance you get when the weight of an extra $100 is removed from your wallet. You won't need to visit a chiropractor anymore. Thanks, 4070 Ti.
Thanks, Steve.
This result has it just behind the 7900 XT, or achieving 79% of the performance of the RTX 4080 16GB. At 1440p, the 4070 Ti runs at 414 FPS average, finally putting it into visible range by the average human, from what we've been told anyway. 414 FPS average means the 4070 Ti just barely outdoes the 6950 XT, which itself was recently available for cheaper, and it allows the 7900 XTX a lead of about 29%, or about 14% or so over the 7900 XT. The 4080 16GB leads by 21%, once again establishing that calling this a 4080 ever would have been a completely insane decision. Months ago when they unlaunched the card, one of the things I genuinely asked the audience in our announcement of their announcement of unlaunching the card was, okay, so is it all fine now? Do we forgive them? And I have my answer, it's no, it's not fine. This is a terrible price. At 1080p, the 4070 Ti falls behind the 6950 XT. In fact, the 6950 XT now leads by 5%. The 6800 XT is nearly equal, with the 3080 not too distant behind. Tomb Raider at 4K is next. The 4070 Ti ran at 116 FPS average, which equates it to the 6950 XT. It's about 17% ahead of the RTX 3080. It roughly equals the RTX 3090 Ti. You could look at this in two different ways. Either the RTX 3090 Ti was a high-priced, last-second cash grab of a previous generation that from day one lost its value because within 5 months the price was cut by about 60%, and then a few months after that it was cut down to $1,000. Or, moving on, the 7900 XTX outperforms the 4070 Ti by 23%, with the XT non-second X, good luck with that, editors, leading by 7%. At 1440p, the 4090 and 4080 are obviously bound by the CPU. The 4070 Ti isn't, but it's approaching the limits. The 7900 XTX and XT both managed to outperform the 4070 Ti here, but once again, NVIDIA's performance on the 4070 Ti is proportionally improving at a lower resolution. We'll skip 1080p on this one since it's so limited. In Final Fantasy XIV at 4K, the $850 RTX 4070 Ti TUF ran at 116 FPS average, outpacing the RTX 3070 by 62% for only 70% more money. Awesome, that's great. It's really good progress. That's 0.9% more performance for every 1% more money spent. On the other hand, you could say it's 17% better than an RTX 3080 for 14% more baseline MSRP. Or you could say that the 4070 Ti, nearly named RTX 4080 12GB, achieves 76% of the performance of an RTX 4080 16GB. That wouldn't have ever created problems, and fortunately, NVIDIA wouldn't ever consider naming a video card the same thing as another video card that exists on the market, even though one of them is something like half of the performance of the one that has the same name but a different memory solution. It's a 1030 DDR4. So, F1 2022 at 4K is next. This list is short because we only recently started testing this version of the game. Fortunately, we don't need any more data to know our conclusion on this product. The RTX 4070 Ti ran at 121 FPS average here, allowing the 6950 XT a 10% lead. Actually, everything on this chart leads except for the older AMD hardware. The 4080 holds a 25% boost, with the XTX about 36% ahead. At 1440p, the 6950 XT's lead is reduced to 9%, and the 4080's advantage is reduced to 15%. Let's move on to the next one. Strange Brigade at 4K is next. We like this one as a Vulkan API test just to cover all the bases for weird behaviors. The only thing weird in this chart is the 4070 Ti's value. Well, it's becoming less weird with each passing chart. It gets beaten by an RX 6800 XT, and it only outperforms the 3070 by 32%, but it's 60% more money. So that's about 0.5% performance increase for every 1% more money. This is horrible value. Even if you adjust for inflation, still pretty bad. The RTX 3080 outdoes the 4070 Ti, as does the 6950 XT. The RTX 4090 remains a bit of an island and keeps its impressive performance positioning. That's enough rasterization testing, honestly. We have a few more games. I scrubbed through them. They're all kind of the same results. So Horizon Zero Dawn we have as well, same type of results we're seeing. We're just going to skip them. They tell the same story. The 4070 Ti would have been a disgrace as a 4080, and NVIDIA at least cut the price, but they knew, clearly, that they were in an impossible position. A conundrum, if you will. With the 70 class naming and the high price being what it is. So this is still entirely a situation of NVIDIA's own creation. We don't feel bad one bit for making it so painfully obvious how poorly positioned this is, and it was not possible to recover this launch once they had started the momentous shitstorm that they had created. In full load power testing and conducted at the PCIe rails and slot, we measured the RTX 4070 Ti at 290 watts for performance VBIOS or 286 for the quiet VBIOS. The 4070 Ti Tough is therefore about equal to the 6800 XT in power draw, with the 4080 drawing 20 watts more. The overclocked 4070 Ti hit 307 watts, so even though it's $50 more in MSRP than the baseline, thanks to ASUS's changes, it's not really giving us any additional overclocking power headroom, so pretty disappointing. If it were MSRP, this boost would make more sense. The only promising aspect is that the power consumption is much lower than the 3090 Ti, but certainly the card cannot hit that 3 times performance number that NVIDIA claimed. Transient testing is up next. In this testing, we use an oscilloscope to plot the transient spikes, or the excursions away from the average power consumption. This is measured commonly in microseconds of length. They are very short in duration. Most transients we measure are in the 40 to 200 microsecond range, but we've seen some as long as 1 millisecond on the RTX 4090. Transients are important because they tell us a picture that averaging power can't tell, just like 1% lows does. Significant transient spikes can cause a system to unexpectedly shut down if the power supply can't soak the sudden surge in power requirement. Here's the chart. In this testing, we want to see the red bar be as close to the blue bar as possible. The nominal power consumption was typically about 289 watts, but sometimes it ran above or below that. In F1 and Port Royal, we measured below the nominal, as in other tests. The transient spikes in Port Royal were pretty brutal, actually, going up to 100% over baseline, but the increase over the TDP is only about 35%. So if you're planning for the high average, or 289, it's not as big of a spike. F1 had transients of about 61% from baseline in the game, and then Doom and Rainbow Six were at 33 to 40% transient spikes. So overall, NVIDIA's 40 series architecture has drastically improved in its power behavior from previous generations. This is somewhere they're doing well. It seems like they've resolved most of the massive 2.5x transients that we saw in the past that could knock some power supplies offline. This also partly comes down to the ASUS TUF card design, so in that respect, they're doing pretty well. Here's a quick frequency test to validate the performance. The 4080 ran at 2775 MHz when we tested it, with the 4070 Ti plotting a bit higher at 2820 MHz. This is with the same test conditions. It's also somewhat normal for lower-end hardware to clock higher because it's getting rid of cores, in this case, a lot of them, so it has more thermal headroom to boost. Additionally, though, the ASUS TUF card will perform differently than an FE, and NVIDIA didn't make FEs for the 4070 Ti's, but it did for the 4080 on this chart. In thermal testing to steady state, we noticed the 4070 Ti ran at about 61 degrees for core average, with a hotspot at 74 degrees Celsius, with the TUF that is. Fluctuation was higher than typically observed here, and the memory temperature ran at 70 degrees Celsius. All of these numbers are acceptable, and they're within typical performance expectations, and the memory temperature is well within the spec. As for the fan, it ramped to about 1400 RPM and held for the majority of testing. Fan hysteresis and behavior were reasonably defined, and as far as ASUS's execution of vBIOS, we think the fan curve was well plotted. Ray tracing is up now. Ray tracing is complicated because we have to consider both DLSS on and off, then of course FSR for AMD, and then just controlled with no DLSS at all. Starting with a control, we'll benchmark control. We're testing this one without any DLSS or FSR type tech. At 4K, the RTX 4070 Ti ran at 39 FPS average. It's about equal to an RTX 3090, and it allows the 3090 Ti a lead of 21%. You might be asking yourself, what happened to the 3 times performance improvement over the RTX 3090 Ti? Oh, that's right, it wasn't real. Back to the chart, the 7900 XTX leads the 4070 Ti by 15%, with the 7900 XT about equal. At 1440p, the RTX 4070 Ti slightly passes the 3090, with the 3090 Ti's lead reduced to 13%. As the resolution decreases, the gap between them is closing. Maybe NVIDIA got its 3 times gain numbers by running the tests at 480p with DLSS 6.0. As for the XTX, it still leads, with the XT about tied. Ray tracing for F1 2022, instead, we tested at 4K first, and the RTX 4070 Ti ran at 44.5 FPS average. That positions it just behind the 3090 Ti. And we all clearly have the same definition of a 3 times uplift as NVIDIA, and they're definitely doing that here. At 1440p and ray traced, the 4070 Ti is again behind the 3090 Ti by a couple FPS. Cool, so basically what's happening here is NVIDIA's entire 3.0x increase claim was predicated on the back of an unclaimed and unfair DLSS 2.0 versus DLSS 3.0 comparison. In Cyberpunk, and tested with the same version of DLSS on all NVIDIA devices, that means no 3.0, and FSR on AMD, the 4070 Ti pulls 45.5 FPS average at 4K. It's about the same as the 3090 Ti. Technically, it's 1.3% better. Now, sometimes we like to give the benefit of the doubt, so here's what we think happened. When NVIDIA claimed a 3x increase, we think that they saw this 1.3% advantage in the 4070 Ti, and they accidentally moved the decimal place 1 to the right, and then they accidentally changed the percent sign to an X, and then they accidentally deleted the 1 at the front of it, and it became 3x. Anyone could do it. It's completely understandable. You only need to make like 4 or 5 consecutive and very obvious mistakes and not catch any of them, and that's how you get the answer. So on the chart, the 4070 Ti gives the 4080 a 12 FPS lead. It's about 28% here, so definitely not fair to call the 4070 Ti a 4080, and the 7900 is just behind the 4070 Ti this time. It's between 2 hard spots. Either they have to admit that there is 0 generational improvement, basically, or a very, very small amount between a 4080 12 gigabyte and a 3080, or they have to show to their customers that they are now increasing the price of the 70 class 2 times within 3 generations, which, per NVIDIA's own words, is about the upgrade cycle, or if you're being charitable, 60% increase in 1 generation. So that's where we are. Those are their only 2 options. It is simply untenable to choose either. The third option, which wouldn't have been feasible because they were too deep in it, would have been to cancel the product entirely, but it was too late for that. So this is one giant mistake of a product launch for NVIDIA, where they stumbled into trying to go for the former option and saying there's no generational gain between 4080s unless you enable DLSS 3, at least as compared to the 3080. And that also would have forced them to admit that the 4080 16 gigabyte is really nowhere close to the 4080 12 gigabyte if you're going by name alone. It just was completely unreasonable to ever call it that. That would be tantamount to lying to the customers, which, I mean, again, it wouldn't be the first time that they sort of, oopsie, we dropped a huge amount of performance, changed to something like the memory, and then now it sucks, but it has the same name or close enough to it. So the average customer who doesn't pay that close attention to the letter G in front of your DDR memory type gets screwed. The 4070 Ti here, they crushed themselves by setting the expectations far too high with that 3.0 number. Yes, it looks like a nice number to say, but it's just so uncommon and it requires such an unfair test condition, it doesn't make any sense. If we're going to play those kinds of games, you might as well just go in and tweak the graphic settings until you find the one that hamstrings your competitor the most and boosts you the highest, which they'd kind of gotten away from those types of games. NVIDIA's whole spiel has been, we market on quality. We don't play stupid games. Well, here's stupid games, and they got their stupid prize. The 4070 Ti is simply demonstrably bad value. It is an insult that they ever thought it could be a 4080, and renaming it and dropping the price $100 was simply not enough. So that's the review. Where's my... I had to walk out of shot to get my prize for NVIDIA. Here's a GN Award crystal. NVIDIA has earned it. You can buy yours on the store, but it's right here. We'll leave it here. So when you're ready to pick up your stupid prize, there it is. Thanks for watching. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to grab one of those, or our Disappointment Build t-shirts, which have the 3 GPUs outlined on the front, and they are limited. We're only doing 3 runs of these, so grab one on the store today to support our work and testing. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.